Hi, I'm Dr. Angela Trego. I was one of the lead consultants who worked with faculty to update the Washington Skills Standards for professional technical faculty from its 2012 version to the current one. In the first video, we cover the overall update process and focus on critical work function A. The third video in the series focuses on critical work function D. In this video, we're focusing on critical work function B, develop outcomes, assessments, and curricula. We'll walk you through its influence on your professional development plans and in the classroom. I'm joined by Professor Amy Hesketh from Olympic College Film School. Z was one of our DEI focus group members. Amy, you've been teaching in the system for almost a decade. What do you see as some of the game changers in the 2024 update of the skills standards compared to the 2012 version?
In working in the skills standards, the most important aspects that we discovered were incorporating diverse perspectives, creating more equitable opportunities for students, and creating inclusive classroom environments. We incorporated those into all of the critical work functions. Another really important aspect that we explored in the modification of the critical work functions was the creation of instructor proficiency levels for technical knowledge, performance indicators, and employability skills. Out of this work, 10 new instructional approach themes emerged, one of which was overcoming barriers to entry, accommodating diverse learning styles, integrating cultural relevancy, providing culturally responsive assessment and feedback, using motivational techniques, ensuring equitable access, forming diverse advisory committees, incorporating diverse instructional resources, including cultural acknowledgement, emphasizing equitable anti-racism, anti-bias, and cross-cultural instructional practices. One of which that really stood out to me was incorporating diverse instructional resources. This can mean a lot of things, but for me, it meant revising a lot of my examples in the classroom to include a lot of different peoples and perspectives. It also meant revising some of the language in my slides to be a lot more inclusive of gender identity and any other kind of identity that might appear to be biased in my materials. Another that felt really relevant to me was providing culturally responsive assessment and feedback. To me, culturally responsive assessment and feedback means that I'm getting feedback directly from the students in the classroom. I might gather anonymous feedback by handing out, assessments that don't have a name linked to them so that I can gather the general knowledge of the class and if my instructional methods are actually working in the classroom. I don't just say, stop, my lecture or my talk and ask if there are questions. I might ask specific questions of students and be open to more of a discussion about the material. Another way of doing this is to incorporate assessment into my Canvas courses. Additionally, I tend to not use as many timed quizzes. Traditional assessment methods can sometimes marginalize students. To me, it's really important that students truly understand what I'm teaching in the classroom. I want them to not just take a timed test and regurgitate a bunch of information that they may or may not have memorized. When they do this with a timed test, I don't feel like it's a true assessment of knowledge. Timed tests cause anxiety. You're creating a very specific and rigid atmosphere. I like to assess on a lot of different levels. So I'll talk directly to my students and, have oral assessment. I'm in a type of classroom where I can walk around and interact with students and use different kinds of assessment methods, especially if I'm working with equipment with the students. We can talk about the equipment and I can find out what they know about it. But There are other examples if I'm giving a lecture. I don't necessarily like to just give a lecture and talk at my students. I like to introduce concepts one at a time and encourage a discussion, an open discussion in my classroom. Methods like this can allow the students to feel comfortable with you and the material and with each other, because a lot of the learning happens outside of the classroom. Students will talk about the material and understand it better, even when you encourage a discussion that continues long after you've concluded the class. I think that we're all really focused on not only learning specific skills, but creating a sense of lifelong learning and an environment where our students can learn. So when we think about assessment methods, we need to think about getting at each individual student and seeing how can we assess each individual student. Now, I could sit down with every single student and find out how they learn and find out how much they've learned in my class, but this is going to be really time consuming. If I instead think about, okay, well, there are a bunch of students who may be able to tell me things orally or maybe learning orally through my lectures. There's some that may be learning more tactile. There are some that may be able to be assessed with a written either exam or a paper. I like to use a lot of different styles of assessment and make sure that I'm hitting everybody. Otherwise, if I just have one type of assessment, I'm not really getting a good understanding from the group, and individual students may fall behind. As we revised the skill standards, we really thought about changes in technology, instructional delivery, student demographics, and the impacts of the pandemic.
Those were some, in a way, small but very significant points that will help us be better faculty members and help our students. So, skill standards tell you what you need to know and do to succeed in the classroom. They're comprised of critical work functions, which encompass broad main roles, key activities, which are specific tasks, performance indicators that focus on measures, and technical knowledge, which is the technical know-how.
Angela, what's the takeaway for faculty?
It's really important because faculty will use the skill standards in their professional development plans and in their classroom, helping you advance in your career and your students be more successful. Today's PDP requirements include a minimum of 5 performance outcomes, 3 of which must be critical work functions. Those are A, manage learning environment, today's topic, B, develop outcomes, assessments, and curricula, and critical work function D, provide student instruction. Let's explore some real-world applications for critical work function B and its first key activity. So say you selected key activity 1, identify, evaluate, and modify outcomes to work on your professional development plan. Amy, how does this actually play out in the real world? What does integrating this key activity look like in your classroom, and how do you make it meaningful for your students?
First, I'd reference the performance indicators and technical knowledge of key activity 1. Then I'd gauge my personal level of proficiency. You can see there are 3. Am I at the baseline, intermediate, or mastery level of proficiency? When I started as an adjunct at Olympic College, I was definitely at the baseline. I was a beginner, and so I was really just getting comfortable with understanding what the outcomes meant on the courses that I was given to teach. This included understanding the language, Bloom's taxonomy that might be used in there, the verbs, and what they really meant toward modifying any of my curriculum in my classroom. Some of you might be given as an adjunct all of the curriculum in your class, and you're really just figuring out, okay, well, what does that look like when I'm actually teaching it in my classroom? Others might be given the opportunity to modify the way that you teach that curriculum a little bit more. And so that modification doesn't necessarily mean that you're modifying your course outcomes or your course description, but you're definitely thinking a lot about how that course is being taught in the classroom. Once I had been teaching at Olympic College for a few years, I was more at that intermediate level. What that meant for me was that I was taking a more critical look at the outcomes in my classes and seeing if maybe they needed to be modified. I might have been, talking to my supervisor and seeing if those outcomes could be modified, or seeing if maybe my classroom materials needed to be modified instead to align more with those course outcomes. So now I'm at the mastery level. At the mastery level, and I think that there are a few levels of mastery, I think. I'm also really involved with modifying our core abilities at the college right now. That level is definitely mastery. What we're doing is we're modifying the core abilities that we want students to have at the moment of graduation. And then we're seeing how all of our program learning outcomes and then our course outcomes, our student learning outcomes actually align with those. What this means for me is that, we do multi-level assessment. So we assess core abilities, we assess program learning outcomes, and we assess student learning outcomes to make sure that all of them work together in a really holistic way. I'm working with other faculty to make sure that all of our SLOs, and this includes, our beginner and intermediate faculty, so that all of our SLOs really meet our program learning outcomes, our PLOs. And then taking a really critical look to see if they match the core abilities that we want our students to graduate with when they have moved on from our program.
If you're meeting in a group setting and watching this video, you may want to pause here and exchange ideas on ways to implement key activity B1 in your classroom. Amy, any parting thoughts for your coworkers?
I found that it has had a profound impact on our curriculum as a department and as a whole. When you start modifying, your outcomes and thinking about your assessment and thinking about diverse learning styles and how you can modify curriculum to really be a lot more inclusive in your classroom, it's kind of remarkable what it does for everyone in the department. I found that everybody, all of the other faculty, were really excited about thinking more about their classroom materials. They got really excited about doing some more research and to incorporate a much more diverse student body and include cultural relevancy. I think at first it was a little intimidating, taking a moment to understand any kind of biases that we might have, and then breaking that open and looking at all of the students who are in our classroom and all of the potential students who we can have in our classroom, and an opportunity to really truly understand your students and modify your curriculum in a way that makes a lot of people in your community able to learn this material. Another really exciting thing that happened, we noticed a lot more diversity in our classes themselves. And so, just by word of mouth, a lot of students have been coming to our classes in particular, knowing that we provide this environment that tailored to them and to their learning style and takes a look at their culture. And knowing that they have the tools for success, the more that you can really provide to your students for their success, the more they will come to you to learn. And that's why we're all here, right? To teach students and make sure that they learn the material.
That we are. Thank you for your insight, Amy. We really valued your participation in the focus groups and appreciate your perspective that you brought to this discussion. There are 2 other videos that focus on critical work function A and D, respectively. Your feedback is welcome. We appreciate your involvement and wish you and your students academic and professional success. Want to learn more? Visit the website www.skillstandardswa.org for more information.